Hello everyone, welcome back to part 11 of the mystery of the bevel blocks. If you have not already, please try to catch up on the previous episodes as we are building upon concepts brought up in those videos. Now today, we have some really interesting connections to make. Now in this point in the research, I knew I was seeing more than coincidences, and I knew that these hallmarks were following me from site to site. And I was getting pretty good at spotting them. And here we're in Utica. And at first, you don't see anything in this wall. It's pretty smooth. You know there's mortar. You see the square holes. Then you look up here at the top. Aha! A bevel block. And what does that say? These are probably all bevel blocks. And they have been either restacked and mortar has been applied. Or this is an original structure. And this is repair mortar, right? So you can see these older blocks laying around also, most of the original construction blocks. But that might be a faithful restoration too, that might be close to the original configuration. And if so, weird knob, that's kind of interesting, right? So I like that example, that's really important to point out. And those holes along the top, more than likely, decorative cornice, right? That seems logical. Over doorway. And this maybe even this was a window. You can see that outline, and this might have been the cornice that went over that window, right? So you kind of piece some things together. Maybe if that is the original configuration. Yeah, Utica, Tunisia. And next, Olympus, Turkey. I love this site. I used this site in my Gates of Perception video. There is a lot to talk about at this site. One of my favorite things, though, is this gate. Now this one, you see this exact same styling at Baalbek, and you see a lot of other connections to Baalbek. And I'm going to try to show you guys a few right now that you've probably never seen before. And this is where I'm going to go a little further than what Brian Forrester is saying. And I want to push that some of these elements might even be pre-Greek. And these people were the people who built the Baalbek structures as well. So, first, I want to point out the obvious hallmarks. We went over this in the Gates of Perception video. Trapezoidal door. You have a cornice. This is a very nicely decorated one, a very elaborate execution, and nice little scrolling side pieces here. And you don't see many square holes. The holes you do see might be damaged. I'll admit that. Some of the damage is at corners. Interesting, but I'll admit that's probably just natural damage. But when you look close at this wall, you do start noticing these little lips, these cusps of rock on these blocks. Not all of them, but some of them. And also you see the incised coping along the top. It's a double incised motif. You have the small ones and then these long ones. They're interesting. And some of the sizes, the rows, you see a large row, thin row, and it staggers. Stays pretty level, mostly uniform, mostly formal execution, right? Maybe that's a square hole anomaly there. And I think maybe that one there inside the gate, perhaps. But we're going to see the other side of this gate too. But I want to point out these cusps of rock here. And we're going to jump over to Baalbek next. And I want to point out something over there. Okay, guys. Now what do you see? I think I see cusps of rock on some of these blocks. Now, if I get too close, the quality does break down. I'm going to say that's about as close as we want to go. But I think these are very odd. And I think down here, these aren't bevels. These are cusps of rock in here and along the bottom here. They are interspersed with bevel blocks. A round hole, square holes along the top and over here. Very interesting that it goes from coarse, rough, into smooth and fine in some of these areas, right? And right back to coarse. I don't know if this is the original configuration, but it's very mixed in its execution. And then here's one of those granite columns. This is Aswan granite, And like I was discussing in the comments of I think one of Brian's videos with Chuck and a few other people, this is an Egyptian connection. You know, between Lebanon and Egypt, they had Egyptian stones, so there is a connection there. But this picture really interesting to me. This processing, I don't know what else to call it, this soft molded looking element of the rock. The only other places I've seen that, and like here at Olympus, Turkey, the only other places that I've seen that is in Egypt. And I believe the next picture we go to Egypt. Yep. This is the Menkaure funerary temple. And I think this is the same thing. And this is done in granite, I believe, right? So that's really impressive to me, guys. I think that's a very compelling case for a connection. And some of these have really sharp, defined edges and lines, like something was pressed onto them to keep them square. And this is parts that like oozed in between. I'm guessing, right? And then, of course, these two here might have been nubs of stone. That's interesting to me. And maybe over here, I don't know. It's hard to tell in some of these. But I believe these might be the only two on this wall. And this has a companion wall on the other side. Yeah, here you go. So these blocks over here, are they in their original configuration? Maybe, I don't know. They've been carved. The limestone's been carved back for them. I don't know. It's interesting. And also notice, perhaps, square holes. I don't know. Maybe even there in that flanking stone. I don't know. But this is the Menkaure pyramid, and these are the casing stones, the bottom stones, the weird ones that also have a molded appearance, kind of like these. What's that one about? I don't know. That bedrock is crazy. Who knows what's going on? Maybe it extends further behind us. It's hard to find pictures, guys, but yeah, at least this much of whatever this was. Wild. Okay, here's the other side of that gate at Olympus, and I just realized this is where I have the extra picture from Baalbek. It's in the comments of that photo. Okay, so zoom out a little bit, but you can see the lips of stone, right? And they're not on all the blocks, but they are on some of the blocks. And then here's a big square cutout at the bottom. What's that about? This hole down here, what's that about? And then I found, these holes up here at the top, guys, I think, let's let it correct. There we go. You can see these holes, we can call those square holes, I guess. And I think that's where a cornice was attached, right? On the opposite side, there's a really nice, a really nice cornice. And if this was to be broken off, I would assume we would see similar holes behind these, right? Makes sense to me. A simple architectural example and execution. So, some of these square holes might not be as anomalous as you think they are. Here, also in Olympus still. Now here's something I want to go on a little tangent for a minute, guys. This gate style is very unique to me, and I didn't bring this one up in my Gates of Perception video, but let's go into it now, because this is pretty wild to me. First of all, there's one bevel block. Out of the whole structure, there's just this one. And I don't know what that means. This is all dry laid, so I don't know if this is restacked. It could be. I'm not sure. These elements are very unique, and I'm not sure. It could be original. Maybe these up here are also bevel block, or portions of ones. So maybe a faithful restoration, or an attempt. So maybe the gate is original, though. So, what is that shape about? We've seen that before. If you follow Graham Hancock's work, you know you've seen that before, with this little extra bit. So, let's jump over to another continent real quick, and let's look at something else. Okay, now we're in Ethiopia. Now, how about this? There's a lot of overlapping hallmarks in Ethiopia as well. Now that we've seen a few of these other sites and we know some of the hallmarks, again, we're going to see this style of gate. What's that about? How is that? Why does that mirror in Turkey? That's weird. How they know about that style. That's a unique architectural motif. And again, with the 4 pegs on the corners, again, what's all that about? You see that a lot of places. Now here, I don't see many square holes in Ethiopia. I see a lot of cross motifs in places. That's interesting. Not Christian cross, but geometric cross. Perfect squares. The top of the Church of St. George here, this is a cross motif. And this whole structure is really interesting to me. Again, you have the same pattern, motif for these little windows. You have the 4 pegs, an incised motif. And then look at the foundation. This is really interesting to me, how it almost resembles an Andean cross, right? How it has the extra little bits, and it continues all the way around the structure. And it's got a triple step to it. And just, an interesting, kind of a coincidence maybe, but just, it's an interesting execution. And, this site's pretty anomalous. There are other features of it that are kind of strange. Square indentations. And, this is really well done. And then you see the gate for the front has a triple incised motif. I believe that's trapezoidal. I believe, maybe not. I have a couple of pictures and angles. This looks pretty square. So I think most everything in Ethiopia is pretty square, except those weird pointed gates. So I'm kind of confused by those. Those are kind of a unique hallmark. They're kind of a mix of the classical Greek, and then also a mix of like Arabic stylings with the pointed parts. And then, I don't know, some of these other pieces, what we're going to call these South American, the way they look, I don't know. Just looks a little bit too much the same to be a coincidence, but I'll concede it could be. But inside some of these places in Ethiopia, we have motifs like these, spiral motifs, star motifs, cross motifs. There's a lot of overlapping symbolism at this site. And some of these buildings are so impressive, right? This is just turned from rock into a structure so smoothly. Amazing. And here, spiral motifs, cross motifs. This little motif, which I think I'm going to call that the capital T shape. I don't know if this is an original, like if this is damaged down here, but this, we might call that a capital T shape as well. That's interesting. Aha, but here we do see a Christian cross in this execution, and I don't know, that looks original to me. That doesn't look to be modified or, converted from an older pattern or older motif. That looks like an original motif there. At least I think it does. Very interesting. And some more of these, they only have maybe a couple of these just, symbolically for whatever they represent. They didn't need them all. And you can see the supporting columns. These are more than likely contemporary to the same time that these were carved out, I'm gonna have to say. It looks too good. It's just really well done. And then, like, this structure, this whole structure, one piece, that is really impressive. Same repeating motifs, the foundation, triple step. That might be trapezoidal. I don't know. See, some of these angles really, they mess with you. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. That may be, might not. And what does that remind you of this place? At least it does me. Look at this. Now we've seen those other places. Look at this. Cut down into the ground. This is that place at Darius's tomb. This is the official name is incredibly hard to pronounce. It's also called the Zoroaster's Cube, or a fire tower, or a fireplace. So we can call it Zoroaster's Cube. That's a nice name for it. And it's so anomalous. It's got all these square holes in it that are unnecessary. And then it's got these rectangular indentations that look, decorative, obviously. And they're on all sides. And I proposed earlier on in my series that this site had the 4-peg motif, and I was coming back here to see if it did. And I'm gonna have to correct myself and say I don't think they are. Like, down here, definitely not. And this might just be a trick of the photo, damage. Maybe that's not a remnant of a post like I thought it was. But even still, guys, even without those posts being on the corners like I thought they were. I think there's still a pretty good case to be made for this place. Let's see here. Let's go top to bottom with this thing. So, an incised step little motif there. There's probably one on top here. An interesting lintel motif, the way it flips, right? That's an interesting one. That's like a trapezoidal indentation. That's interesting. These are some square ones. Some are square, some are rectangular. Square one at a corner. You can see where the stairwell used to be, and it's just gone. And look at that. I should put this in the bevel block list. I did not realize the stairs are bevel blocks, and they are the style with the wide margin and the recessed, coarser processed interior and the nicely processed exterior or perimeter. That's amazing. I didn't even realize that till I looked at this picture just now. That's interesting in there, that little piece that's cut out. I don't know what to make of that. Like, if some of this stuff's been shoved back in there, the way this must have locked into the tower must not have been that well done, or something like a cataclysm must have happened that would have shook the stairwell loose, and then over time it crumbled. I believe there's some blocks still laying around. You can see them over here. And I think there's some more around the other sides. Yeah, you can see maybe a couple over here. So there's a few more, there might be a few more original pieces that are still laying around this place. But yeah, so I guess I was wrong about these posts, these 4 corner posts. I thought that was going to be a connecting hallmark, but now I'm still convinced that this is a connected site somehow, because these are just interesting. They remind us of that other site that had all the decorative, it was like a decorative treatment to the surface of all the stones. We also see anomalous square holes at corners and other places. For whatever reasons they were for, we don't know. And then just the fact that these are an incised stepped motif. And these look just like those doorways we were looking at in Ethiopia just a second ago. Just, it's kind of funny that they're not all the same. Each one looks a little bit different in dimension. So you have rectangular, square, and then these look square, but then the little interior elements are rectangular. And those look to be about the same size as the treatment. Interesting. Some other things to note about some of these sites. Underground elements, right? There could be underground elements to these sites that may or may not be documented. Here also, perhaps, underground elements. I did notice in this picture that these holes, if they were square or not square, it's funny how the pattern repeats, right? There, 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 there. And these two at the top. I'm assuming there's another one up here on this one as well. What is that about? Is that just for climbing up this thing? Was it for scaffolding, attaching scaffolding? Wouldn't they want to cover that up when they were done? Did they not care? Perhaps. Interesting that it all matches. Perhaps it was a decorative element, like a statue or something that was connected. Could be. Don't know. I think, yeah, real quick, I did see... What is that about? That little square hole? Someone got an answer for me there. And maybe, is there remnants of other ones with filler stones in there? Or the remnants of whatever went in there? I'm not sure, right? But what is that one about? That one's wild. I don't know. Well, I'd take the time to even do that. And then we started asking questions about some of the other holes. Are they damaged? Or these up here look like they were not damaged. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. These have a pattern to them. Some of these are in rows. This is not rifle fire or projectiles or weathering. Perhaps places for attaching these cornices, right? If these are separate, I don't know. It's weird the way they're attached. Like 2 little holes here. What's that about? It's interesting to me. Some of these little holes might not just be the little natural holes in the geology that you think they are. Also, I wanted to point out these little gutter systems, these little drains. We saw that yesterday in the video about the Sri Lanka site. That little place had these. That's interesting to me. And then I also wanted to show you this from Baalbek, because look at that, guys. This is just like the execution in Sri Lanka. Now, I'm not sure if that's a smoking gun connection or not, but the execution is almost identical. In Sri Lanka, it's done into I guess we'll call that a bedrock feature that was modified, and in this it's done into a big stone. And would the orthodox traditional hypothesis be that that was for attaching, like we see in the repaired version at the Sri Lanka site, flashing for a structure that would protrude out from there? Now, if that is the case, then it couldn't protrude very far or be very good of use, because right here we have these, which would you assume those are cornices that would go there? So why would you have a cornice and then a flashing for a structure above that? I don't know. So that's why in the Sri Lanka configuration, I'm assuming that's a natural gutter system that a simple gutter system that they've carved. And in this instance, I'm going to assume that's what they're going for as well. There may be a remnant here of a hard edge where the water was supposed to run down, and perhaps here, I don't know. This also has some crazy weathering, some foliage here. I'd love to go over there and see what's behind all this foliage, but we definitely see other anomalous square holes all throughout this wall. And I'm going to propose that this is an original wall, guys. This Brian Forster and others might say this is Roman. I'm going to go further and say anything that's tightly laid and finely dressed with these bevels on them that are in this configuration, this is obviously original. Who's going to take this apart? Who's going to carve anything of this quality and attempt this? Only the original builders would do this. I mean, this might be one whole block. Maybe, where's the seam, right? Maybe here? Is that the seam? So could this very well be a hole at a corner? And over here as well, if this is a seam? It's hard to tell where the seams are on some of these things. These are huge. But I don't know. This is a wild configuration of anomalous marks. And the way it looks in Sri Lanka might be the orthodox viewpoint of what this originally was. But I don't know. In this configuration, I don't know if that's correct. And hey, while we're still at Baalbek, let's look at some other things. I know this is a huge picture, but try to take it all in here. This might be trapezoidal. If not, they're just very nicely done, chunky arches that I'm going to say these are bevel blocks. They have maybe the cusp of stone and the bevels, like they're molded. And these have a rounded arch, rounded top, just like that Sri Lanka site. How about that? That's interesting. You don't see these simple rounded arches like this in many cases. And here, this artistic motif, this was probably original and probably had a nicer top coating or top element to it. But I'm going to say that was original. And this gate over here, or is this a window? Maybe that's another gate. Interesting. Who knows? They could have broken one open. You got to consider that too. If they wanted more doors, they could have just busted one of these through. Maybe more instances of a molded lip of a stone over here on the left. And then up here at the top, I think all this is original. This whole structure original to the site. Over here, these look molded, right? And they have square holes in them. The pitted surfaces are interesting. Square hole anomalies. These are in odd locations. If they're for fixtures or for decorative things, they're just in odd places for that. All these blocks down here have square holes in them. These look like original coping stones, nice cornices and big coping pieces. Perhaps like these. Yep. See how badly these are damaged. But all this, all the way up, I'm going to say is original. Almost as if it started out as a nice, beautiful temple, and then it had to be a fort. So fort it became, right? I'm not sure. It just, this is so nicely done. Maybe this is Roman reconfiguration and stacking of elements, maybe, because it's a really odd thing to have such a beautifully carved castle, right? Why would you do that? And the places in Jerusalem that have these upper elements that are obviously castles, arrow slits, obviously castles, right? What is this feature doing on top of a sumptuously carved, temple-like feature? So that's where people get the confusion of the attributions. And I say, me too. I am totally confused by what's going on here. Why does it start out as one thing, and then as it rises, it becomes another thing entirely? And that might be the original builders doing it themselves. I don't know. And here, just to nail the point home, these arches, I believe all these little square hole areas, these square cutouts, were where features went in that maybe resembled some of those Ethiopian examples that we saw. Perhaps. Just a theory. If not, maybe a lintel went over that, a decorative cornice-like lintel piece, and maybe statuary stuff. Other, it's open to debate. There may be other examples. I could be proven wrong. Like we said, same shape, and as you can see, a carved lintel. That lintel is very, there was a really nice elaborate carving on that at one time, so could there be overlapping motifs? I think so. And one more time here, this is Olympos, and this is Baalbek, Lebanon. Another very nicely carved treatment, the same motifs, the same artistic elements. Traditionally, Corinthian columns and sumptuously carved stuff like this is much later. And before that, Doric and Ionic, they don't know. They say either one, they don't know. So I don't know what to do with that and what to think about that. But, thanks to Graham Hancock, this picture, you can see square holes all over this structure, and maybe rectangular holes. Those are wild. I don't know what's going on inside of these blocks in some cases, but just a very impressive, huge gate. And then also at Baalbek, you can look at the symbols and the art and say, hey, star motifs, maybe some cross motifs, just some interesting, the 4 square corners, square holes in the wall behind. So these may be original elements. I don't know. I'm going to say maybe. And then spiral motifs. And then I wanted to go on a tangent real quick and show you guys this site, Qasr Naba, another Roman attributed temple in Lebanon. There also, you see bevel blocks and old coping stones, cornices. And you can see some of the stairs, the way they're constructed, is very reminiscent of Baalbek. And I find the fact that this piece is down here and not up there very puzzling, right? This should be up there for sure, right? And maybe this was a wall, or maybe this was another structure, and maybe that was part of it. But I'm going to say this had to be some massive elaborate temple. And again, you see the Corinthian style columns, the very flowery capitals. These, I don't know what to make of these. They're supposed to be attributed to the later time period, but if these structures are as old as we're saying they are, they should not be here. We should see Doric and Ionic, but not in Turkey. We only see that in Greece. So again, here's something interesting. This molded processing, we saw that in, I believe, here at Nesebar in Bulgaria. You can see this strange, it's almost like it was molded with someone's hand and shaped like it was soft. Very interesting. I don't know if that's a connection, but they look very similar, right? And just to drive the point home again, you can see when they would restore the site, they would collect the pieces, stack them up. Obviously, this was not the original configuration for this element, but it was put back together from scrap elements and maybe faithful, but obviously not original location. And back at Baalbek one more time, to drive the point home again. The lips of stone. These are like rectangular holes. Interesting. 2 horizontal, 1 vertical. Odd. Some of the spots. Odd. And then as the structure rises, it changes in its execution from these, wow, more odd holes, square, rectangular there. Anyway, as it rises, it reaches the cornice level, and then above that, it changes in execution to rough and less decorative, almost no decoration, right? And this, I think, is where it becomes a fort. And we see more instances of square holes. And I can zoom in a little bit more, but it might break down. But yeah, you can see 1, 2, 3, and maybe a few others. So, and a small one, interesting again, odd, anomalous. And if you want to talk about anomalous, look at this. Now we are back again in Olympos, Turkey. Look at all these square holes. Now, if we want to entertain that they're for attaching things, for scaffolding, for support structures, for platforms, for shelving, all those kind of things, I'm open to them. But just what is the need for all of these and the placement for all of these? Now, we can zoom in. This is a pretty good picture. I'll try to zoom in a little bit more. And we'll notice, at first, you don't see any instances of bevel blocks. This isn't, this is heavily eroded, but you can see right here on the end, this one is a bevel block. Several square holes in it. The one above it, probably a bevel block also. Many square holes in it. Some of them do not. Again, this one probably a bevel block. And let's let the zoom box go away. So this one that my arrow is on, more than likely a bevel block. The ones above it, several square holes in them. The ones across the window over here, more than likely also original. Maybe this whole wall, this whole area on both sides is original, and then this in the background is additional, the smaller inferior bricks and rubble fill and reclaimed blocks like that one with the square hole. It looked like this room originally had pillars, but these may have been secondary pillars made out of bricks. So, not sure about the original layout. Might have been all open. And then next, we're going to look at a couple more controversial sites for a minute. We're back in Italy. This is the Aqua Virgo. And I couldn't find many pictures of this. This is actually inside of, I think, a shopping mall now. It is incorporated into it. And this upper structure is obviously later in stucco. But the lower portion really interests me, right? These appear to be bevel blocks. And they appear to have hole anomalies. I don't know if you want to call these square holes. They're heavily eroded, or maybe this is just rough on purpose. The execution is rough on purpose. Very interesting. Here's another angle of it. You can see everything on this side of this railing is a shopping center, I believe. This is inside now, so this is no longer functioning. And a structure's been built on top. And maybe the structure on top is Roman. You can see it's got lots of brickwork and stuccoing. So this might date back to the Romans, but below, who knows? This looks a lot like what we've been looking at. And I've really been wanting to talk about this one with you guys for a while. This one is amazing to me. Pasargade, Iran. This one is one of the most fascinating examples. I've stared at this wall more than any of the others on the list, I think, just because I find it so strange. So let's take a close-up look at this thing and really examine this example. So, first of all, before we even zoom in, what do we see? A whole bunch of holes in this thing. It's definitely a bevel block construction, up until these upper elements that are just, they almost look, destroyed. Maybe cataclysm, maybe damage, weathering over time, who knows, but you could tell the original exterior surface was all bevel block, and maybe it was even just rubble fill, but the rubble fill was original. See how they mate up against the rubble fill in some of these instances? Perhaps. And the way this stuff falls out in these little chunks, perhaps this is original rubble fill. This is more than likely repair to keep this thing from crumbling any further. But what is going on with all these holes? Now we can zoom in. I want to point out some other things besides these holes. Nubs. One nub, two nubs. Those might be the only ones in the picture. On that side of the wall, I see one over here, and maybe one that broke off there, or a remnant, or imprint. Who knows? But why just this one and this one if they're for lifting? If none of the other ones have them, what is that about? And then this lip of stone, the way they kind of sag and protrude, what is that about? Is that because they were soft and the weight above did that? And maybe here? I don't know. It just looks molded and soft to me. This is an amazing, amazing wall. And these elements on the ground, more than likely upper cornice coping elements. You see they have sharp beveled edges and maybe other lines in them, maybe other holes in them. But this is just an amazing wall. What's up with all the holes? What's going on with them? Why do they look like this? Why are they where they are? Why the nubs? Why only a couple of them? Very anomalous wall. And let's look at the scope of this thing. It's huge, right? We were just looking at the left-hand corner. That was only maybe a quarter of the entire structure. It's amazing. So what can we attribute the holes to? I'm going to say outgassing again. Like at the Colosseum, like under the Trajanus Forum. I don't understand what I'm looking at, but it looks like they're at corners of blocks. So either the metal was harvested out of these, which I doubt because no one's going to dig these perfect little square holes to get this metal out. Maybe they are. I don't know. But I'm going to assume that the metal was in these as clamps and ties, and something happened that caused the metal to escape, to be released. I don't know the forces that would cause it to happen, but there was metal in there perhaps, and now there is not metal in there. And what happened caused what we're seeing. And we will close it up with this site, guys, because it's getting kind of long. But this is At-Aret Fortress in Jordan. It is attributed to the Crusades as a Crusader fort. Now, I want to propose that this is from the Crusades. But this is the reason why this was a Crusader fort. This is why they chose this site. These bevel blocks are just like the ones we see everywhere else. Now, these fairly formal. We'll say the rows are pretty straight, the blocks are pretty irregular, and the dimensions, the angles, they're not entirely square in all instances, and the margins are not equal in all instances. So, I'm not sure if the original site was a fort, but the execution, this rough execution, reminds me of some of the other fortress sites we've seen. So, yes, a fort, but how far back does the fort go? So, just some interesting, kind of controversial sites that we might want to go on tangents and look into the history of these places a little deeper and see if there's any stories about them that maybe predate the constructions that we're familiar with. So, in the next episode, we're going to go look at a polygonal megalithic pyramid in Greece, and we're going to examine some beehive tombs in Turkey and Greece. Those might be a tangent in and of themselves. Those, some of them are considered tombs. One is called a treasury, so I don't know what to make of that, but we will investigate those and see where those lead us. It looks like there's a lot of legacy structures built around these and in the same fashion. So we're going to try to maybe discern the differences there and try to find the best examples. And those we're going to maybe propose to be the oldest examples, whereas the Orthodox traditional history has it the other way around. But we're going to see if we can spot some hallmarks there, make some connections, and propose maybe that they are indeed earlier and connected to the cultures we are discussing. So, thank you guys for hanging out with me today, and we will talk to you next time.